West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Dr. Fauci, thank you so much for being with us. A lot to get to, and now we want to talk about children and the start of school. I just want to pull back a little bit about where this virus could go. I'm hearing anecdotally through people I know about breakthrough cases that are really serious, that end up with people being on ventilators. These are people who are vaccinated but still got COVID. What is the potential that this spirals beyond Delta to monster variant?
Well, there's always a risk of, as you get more circulation of virus in the community, that you'll get enough accumulation of new mutations to get a variant that is functionally different than the ones we're seeing now. Delta has the capability, unlike Alpha, of transmitting extraordinarily readily and efficiently from person to person. That is the reason why we've seen that surge that we've been through over the last few months, where we went from 11,000 cases a day up to 150, 160,000 cases a day. One of the reasons why we want to make sure we get as many people vaccinated as we possibly can is that viruses will not mutate if they don't have the opportunity to spread and replicate. So the more dynamics of viral activity you have in the community, the greater opportunity you give to the virus to mutate. So it's one of those things that you're vaccinating now to prevent the next mutant coming, the next variant from coming. And again, that's yet again another reason, besides protecting the health of the people who are getting vaccinated, protecting the community, you don't want to see more variants come in, because then it would in many respects negate some of the very positive protection that you get from the vaccines.
Isn't it always also about protecting our children under 12 who still can't get the vaccine? The Delta can spread among children. The transmissibility, as you just said, is far worse than the first phase of COVID. It really, it spreads quickly, and it's an incredibly terrible experience if it's survivable. How do we address this with children going to school, even if they're wearing masks? Is that enough at the rate we're going?
Well, you just said something that is really one of the fundamental principles of vaccine protection of the community. When you have vulnerable people who either are not yet eligible for vaccines, the way many of our children, 11 years old and younger, who are in the school system, they are vulnerable. The way you protect the vulnerable is to surround them by people who are vaccinated, be they teachers, personnel in the school, students in the school who are old enough to get vaccinated. For example, those who are 12 years old and older. That is a fundamental public health principle of how you protect vulnerable people, is you surround them with vaccinated people.
Dr. Fauci, it's Willie Geist. Good morning. I want to ask you about boosters. There was that new study that came out yesterday, I'm sure you saw, published in the peer-reviewed Lancet from public health experts here in America and around the world that said boosters at this time for otherwise healthy people are not necessary. And in fact, they went so far as to say it may be unethical given the fact that so many places in the world still need all these doses of the vaccine. So what is your position on boosters right now? Should healthy people, not people who are at risk, who do need the boosters, but should otherwise healthy people be getting the booster?
Yeah, Willie, that's a great question. And with regard to that article, that's a controversial article that I actually disagree mostly with. There are a couple of aspects that get conflated in that article. Certainly, if you have countries, low and middle income countries, that don't have any vaccine, and you make no attempt to get them vaccine and only focus on boosting individuals who are in your own country, that is not the right thing. And I disagree with that. However, you can do both the way we're doing in this country. You can have a program to give booster, in this case, third shots for people who've gotten the 2-dose Moderna and Pfizer vaccine. You can get them boosted if you put a considerable amount of resources and effort into getting low and middle income people vaccinated. And that's exactly what we're doing. I don't have the time or you to go over all the things that are being done, but they are being done. So don't conflate those two. Once you separate those two and say, okay, let's look at now the rationale. If you look at the data are strongly suggestive in this country, and more than just suggestive in Israel, that you have a waning of immunity among people across age groups, not just the very, very elderly. You have clearly waning of immunity against infection and clear-cut indication of waning of immunity against severe disease. So what we're trying to do right now is have a plan that by the time we get to the middle of September, the week of September the 20th, we will have a plan to vaccinate people who are having that waning immunity. The part about that plan that's important, it will be contingent upon the FDA analyzing the data, not only from the United States, but from Israel and other countries, to determine if it's appropriate and scientifically sound to do it. So when you have people objecting to the plan to do it, they tend to leave out that nothing is going to get done until the FDA analyzes the data very, very carefully the way they do and make a determination from a regulatory standpoint of should we be giving the boosters. Myself, as a scientist who have seen some of the data, I believe when you look at that data carefully, there's going to be a decision to actually give the boost as opposed to not giving it.
Okay, that's interesting. That document, that article got a lot of attention yesterday. Interesting to hear you contradict it there point by point. Dr. Fauci, apologies for a question you've answered so many times over the last year, but I think it needs to be driven home. I know so many otherwise rational, smart people I know that I talk to who say, I'm healthy, I'm this age, I've never been sick, I don't need to get the vaccine. What do you say to those people? What is the clear case that you make to people who just don't think, they're not reading crazy conspiracy theories even. They just think, I don't want to put this in my body because I don't need to. What do you say to them?
Well, there are two aspects of that and two approaches you take. First of all, the personal approach. It is true that young, healthy people have less of a chance of getting severely involved in the sense of getting infected and have a severe outcome. There's no doubt about that. But if you look across the country and you look at the hospitals, you see there are plenty of young people who get severely ill. We've had 650,000 deaths in the United States. So although the odds are in your favor, you are not completely exempt from getting seriously ill. That's one component. The other component that in many respects is equally important is that it isn't all about you. If you get infected, even if you don't have any symptoms, it is likely that you will pass the virus on to someone else who might pass it on to someone else who might have a severe outcome leading to hospitalization and even death. So you've got to look at it that you're not in a vacuum. You're part of society. And do you want to be part of the component that propagates the virus and propagates the outbreak? Or do you want to be part of the solution? So, A, you should be worried about yourself because your health is important, as is the health of your family. But you are a part of society, and you do have some responsibility as a member of society.
Dr. Fauci, the back and forth you just had with Willie was both interesting and informative, as usual. My question is one that I think is on the minds of a lot of Americans, and it is this. Is this, the fight against this virus, our real forever war?
I don't believe it needs to be. I mean, obviously, we will always be challenged by emerging and re-emerging infections. We have very good vaccines right now. The virus will mutate and get new variants if we allow it to circulate and propagate itself. And that's one of the reasons why, when you do have the capability of really smashing this virus, let's do it. And if we do it, and I believe we can and will do it, you don't necessarily have to look at the fact that you're going to be struggling with this virus indefinitely. We've had formidable viruses that we've eliminated. Things like polio, things like measles in this country. We can do it if we put our will and all of our resources, which we are doing, to do that. And I'm not only talking about the United States, I'm talking about getting the world vaccinated within a reasonable period of time.
Dr. Fauci, we know that the virus travels when people move around the country. Don Bayer, the Democratic congressman from Virginia, has a bill proposing that people traveling within the United States on airplanes and trains should either be vaccinated or provide proof of a negative COVID test. This is very common practice now in Europe. I've just been traveling all over Europe. You can't get on a plane without having some kind of proof that you're negative. It seems to me crazy that a year and a half into this, I can still get on a plane to Boston or California and nobody's going to check me. Do you think that needs to change?
Well, that's under consideration, certainly. I mean, I have been asked that question, and it actually got some play in the press when I made the answer. I think that if, in fact, it is seriously considered, it's on the table, we're not there yet. In fact, if you look at the 6-point program that the president came out with a couple of days, what we were talking about with travel was doubling the fines of people who, in fact, are traveling and don't get tested. And I believe that the idea about requiring vaccination for travel is something that is on the table for discussion. It has not been decided yet.
It is Tuesday, the 14th of September of 2021, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef. And our daily special is Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. You know, a small scant dash, a mere pinch of hot smoked Hungarian paprika will make all the difference in the world. You should try it. Okay, so it's not a cure for COVID, but it wouldn't hurt. Don't be taking copious amounts of paprika. All right, there's only so much to go around in the world, especially the Spanish kind. As a reminder, the Spanish and Hungarian paprika are just as good as each other. They're equal in terms of their properties and their taste. The Spanish kind is a lot less. There's a lot less of it, so it will tend to be a little bit more expensive. A little bit. And that's just supply and demand. Okay, so the Hungarian is just fine, and it is reasonably priced when put up against, well, the Spanish. Anyway, how are you? The Met Gala was last night, and of course everybody's been talking about it. No one really, although I stand corrected. I put on social media that no one was complaining about Carolyn Maloney's dress and how much her ticket cost was. And I was, corrected, shall we say, that no one was an absolute. I understand it. And I could argue in my defense that it was just a rhetorical flourish, but I did say no one, because I didn't really see any other Twitter outrage other than those directed at AOC. No one was talking about Carolyn Maloney's dress. It had all sorts of, sloganeering too. So, I don't know. Of course, Carolyn Maloney doesn't profess to be a socialist, and apparently she's I don't know enough about local politics to say that Carolyn Maloney is being a hypocrite by being at the gala. Though maybe the argument was that she wasn't really being a hypocrite because she's hoity-toity herself, and we should tax her too. I don't know what the problem is. Look, the Metropolitan Opera is art. Why is it that everybody thinks that anybody who gets to view art is rich? The only people who appreciate art are rich, and so we have to put it down. Come on. I know the whole patron system, even Michelangelo, even Da Vinci, they all had to have rich patrons like the de Medicis. And a lot of criticism or critique of art, or at least the historiography of art. There's been a lot of discussion on the propriety of this patron system of the arts. That a lot of artists that may have been as proficient or as profound as a Da Vinci were not feted because they didn't have the rich patron. Now, I should say, in Da Vinci's aspect, I think a lot of his appeal to the de Medicis, the rich patrons in Italy, is that he was also able to make some pretty good armaments. Okay, he helped the war effort, and those families were at war with each other. You think the mafia was having a problem? La Costa Nostra. Oh, jeez, should have been back in the old days. Okay. So Da Vinci did provide something a little bit more than an aesthetic. And that may be why he had his patronage. Anyway, I don't want to put down a fundraiser for the arts. That is stupid. And then anybody going there is, oh, look at all those rich people. I don't know. I'm not really into fashion. I'll say that. Well, let me take it back. I am a little bit. It doesn't rule me. I'm not as deeply knowledgeable about the history of gowns. Yeah, I know a little bit. But the fashion statement, I think that there's something to be said about designing in terms of our attire. It can be it obviously is a statement. People are not going to be walking about in their everyday lives in these gowns. It's a statement about our society, social interaction, or what have you. And within that context, I'm actually might be entertained by it. So, once again, the fundraiser for the Met, keeps history intact. Okay. I mean, I know it's like anything attached to something that the rich do is supposed to be bad. I understand that. I just don't really ascribe to that sentiment. Okay. Enough said about that. Jeez. Do I talk about Nicki Minaj? There's a way that if you're a guy, if your balls are swelling, I wouldn't think it was the vaccine that was causing it, but maybe sexual activity. The bacteria that causes STDs will make your testicles swell if you have them. Jeez. And you better go get it checked out right away. It's not good. No. And it could be a harbinger of maybe cancer. So there's there's any number of bacterias that will cause testicles to swell. A virus? Unlikely. A vaccine for the virus? Well, a vaccine for the bacteria, which they do have, by the way, especially because you can get these swollen testicles if you haven't been vaccinated for mumps, for instance. So when I hear of people complaining about vaccines and then ailments that occur in the natural world, mostly because you're not taking a vaccine, I'm a little dubious about that. So that claim, whenever it's like, a few degrees removed, my cousin's friend, really? Your cousin? Please. And the friend of the cousin, okay? It's like a story Art Buchwald wrote once about interviewing the wife of the taxi cab driver who drove the astronauts to the airport. Yeah, it was that far back. Mm-hmm. A few degrees of removal, and, the story takes on a life of its own, doesn't it? And it has. So, yeah, the vaccine's not going to make you impotent. But the virus might, especially if you're dead. You can't be much more impotent than when you're dead. All right. Well, I have heard it stated that Minaj's little rendition there, her telling of that story, is another example of erections have consequences. Mm-hmm. All right. Took me a while, but I got around to it, didn't I? Yes, I did. Well, enough of that. What's on the agenda today? The menu. We don't have an agenda. Well, we do, but we also have a menu. Our curated dishes, so to speak. Yeah. All right, enough of this chaos. What's on the curated part of the show as we start here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy? At the top, that was Dr. Anthony Fauci, pretty much putting it in stone that unvaccinated healthy people are not exempt from getting ill. All right. I mentioned yesterday about 5 state workers here who are claiming they have natural immunity. Oh, I got it, so I have natural immunity. Prove that you got it, and there's no such thing as natural immunity, please. Natural immunity happens when we have a lot more percentage of people vaccinated, so there's no place for it to jump, okay? And you're not part of it, so please. And I should mention that since I do have Anthony Fauci in the audio clip here at the top of the show, I am now sure that YouTube will take this show down for vaccine misinformation. Every time I quote Fauci, every time I quote the CDC, the FDA, the Smithsonian. I even quoted the Smithsonian about the 1918 pandemic, and YouTube took down the show for medical misinformation about the vaccine and about COVID. I don't know. The algorithm's messed up, and I have an idea about who's messing it up. We all do. What's on the rest of the menu? Despite loud GOP opposition, the majority of Americans support COVID-19 vaccine mandates, and they do. House Republicans are outraged that Congress might fund the Presidio National Park in San Francisco. San Francisco, they don't want to. Yeah, fascists. And the Department of Justice will increase oversight of police reform monitors. That's right. You get those consent decrees. You better make sure the monitors know what the hell they're doing and they're not bought off. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where North Korea says it tested several new long-range cruise missiles. And apparently they did. And a World Bank report found that climate change could force over 250 million people to move from their homes by 2050. It's coming up. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, to the right down there is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. To the left of the chat room link across the page at netrootsradio.com, by the way, you will then hopefully notice the link to our Patreon page, and if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, if you could send us the equivalent of what you might spend, say, on an espresso-type coffee drink, if you could send those funds our way once a month, we're able to pay our bills, and then we fly under the radar and continue this resistance against the hostile takeover of America by hostile forces, foreign and domestic. Anyway, all hyperbole aside, it's happening, and we are a bulwark against that, and we are able to fly under the radar. We are specifically situated to do so, and we have to thank your generosity for allowing us to do this, and we thank you tremendously. So please, if you can do it, please do. The bills keep going up, and we pay our bills. So thank you. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that, and we thank Tom for doing so. Follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Co's about 10 minutes before showtime, and then I get that posted up on Twitter and other social media platforms, and you know who they are. Follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West, and pick up podcasts. Please do. We need more podcasts out there. Well, I mean, we need you to download more of our podcasts. There's plenty of podcasts out there, but please download more of our podcasts here by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, and wherever podcasts can be found. Yes. Okay. This first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy comes out of the American Independent by Emily Singer. Despite loud GOP opposition to vaccine requirements issued by both private companies and the federal government, mandating the COVID-19 vaccine remains popular, with a CNN poll that was released just yesterday, Monday. That survey found 51% of Americans support requiring the COVID-19 jab for activities like going to work, shopping, or dining in a restaurant, saying it is an acceptable way to increase the vaccination rate. High numbers support vaccine requirements to participate in specific activities that are major fixtures of American life. For example, 55% of Americans support mandating that students get the COVID-19 jab to attend in-person classes, a 6-point jump from April, when CNN last surveyed the issue. Another 55% back requiring the vaccine to go to a sporting event or a concert, up 8 points from April. And 54% support mandating workers get vaccinated before returning to their workplace, up 9 points from April. It sounds like people are getting a little impatient with these. Well, what are they? The brainwashed. Yeah. The unwashed are now the brainwashed. Companies have imposed COVID-19 vaccine requirements, say they have seen major jumps in the number of vaccinated workers. In fact, Delta Airlines chief health officer said on Thursday that the company's decision to impose $200 penalties for unvaccinated workers led to a huge surge in the 20,000 unvaccinated employees getting the vaccine. Just within 2 weeks of the announcement, we've seen nearly 20%, or 1/5 of that 20,000 decide to get the vaccine, Dr. Henry Ting said at a news conference held by the Infectious Diseases Society of America. That surge means 78% of Delta employees are now vaccinated. Tyson Foods saw an even bigger jump in vaccinated employees after announcing a mandate in August. Tyson employees have at least one dose, who have at least one dose, skyrocketed from 45 to 72% after the mandate was announced. And in the early days of the pandemic, Tyson Foods saw massive COVID-19 outbreaks in their meatpacking plants that impacted the food supply chain. Republicans, however, have railed against mandating the COVID-19 vaccine. Even House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy has gotten in on the politicization of the mandates, tweeting in all capital letters on Sunday night, "No vaccine mandates." Idiots. A number of GOP lawmakers and candidates have even used violent rhetoric in their opposition to the new requirements. Of course, vaccine mandates have been part of American life for more than 170 years. Both public and private schools require students to be vaccinated against several communicable viruses in order to attend schools. The U.S. military also requires service members to get vaccinated against a host of different viruses. The GOP opposition to mandates has led to a sharp divide in support for the requirements among the political parties, according to the survey. CNN found that 80% of Democrats say mandates are an acceptable way to increase the vaccination rate, while just 23% of Republicans say the same. Public health experts say that the pandemic is now one of the unvaccinated, with nearly all recent deaths from COVID-19 coming from people who did not get the jab. I wish someone would take a poll on whether we want to use the term jab anymore. God, I hate that term. Anyway, a new study released on Friday from the CDC found that the unvaccinated are 11 times more likely to die from the disease than those who are fully vaccinated. Looking at cases over the past 2 months, when the Delta variant was the predominant variant circulating in the country, those who were unvaccinated were about 4.5 times more likely to get COVID-19, over 10 times more likely to be hospitalized, and 11 times more likely to die from the disease. Josh Israel of the American Independent brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. House Republicans are furious that an appropriations bill includes funds for improvements to a national park in San Francisco. Their objections are that the park is in House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's district, and that the nearly 1,500-acre space includes a public golf course. When have they ever been against golf courses? Jeez.
Nancy Pelosi doesn't deserve park projects. American taxpayers deserve to keep their hard-earned money,
tweeted North Carolina Representative Ted Budd on Friday. So now golf is the infrastructure, mocked Representative Tim Burchett of Tennessee. This year alone, Burchett has sought tens of millions of dollars in earmarks for his own district. The legislation in question is the House Natural Resource Committee's portion of a proposed $3.5 trillion federal spending plan. On September 9th, the panel marked up a draft that included billions in funding for climate, the Bureau of Indian Affairs and Public Lands. One of the line items included was $200 million for the National Park Service to go to the Presidio Trust over 5 years. The trust is a partnership that operates about 1,200 acres of the Presidio of San Francisco, a national park overlooking the Golden Gate Bridge and the San Francisco Bay. Now, let me remind folks, the Presidio is one of the oldest military bases in the United States of America, at least on the West Coast. Granted, it started off as a Spanish fort, but then it was taken over by who? By us, the U.S. So I always like to point out that you can always tell how much Republicans hate America when they want to defund a military base that was built in 1776. Yes, that 1776. Now, the trust was established by the GOP-controlled Congress in 1996 as a new self-sufficient way to manage public lands. The trust leases spaces to businesses and vendors to pay for continued operation of the park. The GOP always likes to decry everything they put in place, and then we start doing, and then they blame us for it. Sort of like how Trump is blaming Joe for, the 5,000 released Taliban fighters. And Al-Qaeda fighters. When it was Trump that did that. Okay, they always lie. Though the trust usually operates without taxpayer funding, it has faced some financial shortfalls in recent years due to the coronavirus pandemic and the site's aging infrastructure. Hell, it was built in 1776. In an emailed statement, a Pelosi spokesperson said, to help meet the needs of this incredibly popular national park in this difficult financial moment, the House Natural Resources Committee chose to include a recommendation. It's a recommendation, by the way, of $200 million to bolster the Presidio Trust, which can be used to immediately tackle deferred maintenance needs as well as continue the rehabilitation of the remaining historic buildings from 1776. Last year, a bipartisan majority in Congress approved billions of dollars for maintenance for other federally owned facilities, but left out the Presidio Trust due to its unique organizational structure, which the Republicans organized. After the markup, committee Republicans offered several amendments to strip the funds out of the bill and repurpose them in various ways. The Democratic majority rejected each attempt. Representative Bruce Westerman, a Repug from Arkansas, complained, "I never heard of the Presidio Park, even though I'd been by it before." What? "I don't know if it costs anything to get in, but I know it costs $120 to play a round of golf on the very nice golf course." Admission to the park is free. The space includes 24 miles of hiking trails, a bowling alley, tennis courts, and athletic fields. The 18-hole golf course is open to the public and offers rates below $120 for golfers who don't need a cart, play Monday through Thursday or in the evening, or live in the city of San Francisco. An October 2019 press release celebrating the site's 25th anniversary as a national park noted that it was among the most visited in the country, welcoming 7.5 million visitors annually. Sarah N. Lynch of Reuters brings us this final offering here on the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The U.S. Justice Department, in the midst of investigating policing practices in 3 major cities, will toughen oversight of federal monitors who supervise implementation of police reforms mandated in civil consent decrees, Attorney General Merrick Garland said yesterday, Monday. The Department's Civil Rights Division is pursuing high-profile investigations into possible police abuses in Minneapolis, Louisville, and Phoenix. If the probes show that those police departments engaged in patterns or practices of discrimination or use of excessive force, the government could seek a consent decree to enforce reforms. Monitors oversee implementation of consent decrees approved by federal courts after being negotiated by municipalities and the Justice Department. They are intended to be neutral arbiters of compliance with a decree. Garland told an event hosted by a police organization that while settlements with police departments have improved policing practices, it is no secret that monitorships also have caused frustrations. While consent decrees and monitorships are important tools to increase transparency and accountability, the department can and should do more to improve their efficiency and efficacy, Garland said in prepared remarks. The new rules impose annual budget caps on monitors to prevent them from running up taxpayer costs for their services, bars monitors from double-dipping by serving on more than one monitoring team at a time, and require more training. They also limit the length of service of monitors and require an assessment of their performance to ensure their effectiveness. Cities and other local jurisdictions also will be allowed after 5 years to ask a court to terminate a monitorship by demonstrating compliance with a decree's terms. Chuck Wexler, executive director of the Police Executive Research Forum Policy Group, lauded the new rules, noting that paying for a compliance monitor can cost big cities up to $100,000 monthly. The steps were crafted after the department heard concerns from police departments, mayors, and others about costs of monitor fees and questions about monitor accountability. And President Joe Biden has vowed to address what he has called U.S. systemic racism. The department in April began its Minneapolis investigation after a white police officer was convicted of murdering a black man named George Floyd. 5 days later, it opened a Louisville investigation after last year's fatal police shooting of a black woman named Breonna Taylor. And the department in August started investigating whether Phoenix police unlawfully used deadly force, retaliated against peaceful protesters, and violated the rights of homeless people. Well, that brings us to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Clinton Johnston. This week, skipping tropes. It's 1973, and Marvel Comics introduces Shang-Chi, Master of Kung Fu. Made by all white guys, modeled on Bruce Lee, Shang-Chi is the rebel son of Fu Manchu. Yeah, he is. He works with MI6. His fellow agent is casually racist. It's all that and more. So when making Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, the modern-day Marvel MCU mechanics looked at this god-awful Orientalist, yellow peril colonialist mess and scrapped it. The only thing they kept is that our beloved Shang is hiding from his father, the leader of an international shadow league of assassins. Of course they kept that, you say, because it's one of our dearest overtired, overused tropes, dudes and dames with daddy issues. Now you'd think that, but part of what makes Shang-Chi and the Legend of Ten Rings so great, and it is great, is that instead of being about Dear Evil Dad, what we focus on is a family torn apart by unprocessed grief. Okay, you should now say, then it's the other one, our favorite Hollywood melodrama menace, The Family in Jeopardy. But like a Tai Chi master, Shang-Chi again deftly sidesteps boring cliche, because in that trope the family is more important than anything, and disparate members must refine their love for each other and reform the family unit. Happily, Ten Rings does not give us such simpering simplicity. Rather, it uses this family to show that either societal pressures or personal shames and fears keep us from accepting both the positive and negative sides of our histories, and thus of who we are. Until we accept those sides, we cannot progress in life. And I can see a little Chinese dualism here, balancing yin and yang, but also, this theme from Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings seems tailor-made to speak to America's struggles right now. And yes, the bus fight, and yes, the scaffold fight, and yes, the lovers fight, and the MCU cameos and karaoke and Awkwafina and Tony Leung, and when we finish our journey, may we all have magical kung fu goddess Michelle Yeoh to welcome us home. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Clinton Johnston. Catch up with us at take2moviereview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
He's running first, second, third. No! He stopped between third and home. What the heck?
Ooh, that's not the time to stop. And now's not the time to stop wearing a mask. Vaccines are a game changer. But the game's not over. Mask up until you're vaccinated. Let's finish strong. For more information, please visit cdc.gov/masks. A message by CDC and the Ad Council.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. And it doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage. Because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
Can we agree that the North won the Civil War?
I'm Lily Ledbetter, and this is a Civil Liberties Minute with ACLU attorney Bill Newman.
And while we're on common ground, can we also agree that the Union was saved, that Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, that slavery was a horrifying institution, and that we shouldn't venerate historical figures who lived to perpetuate a system that treated human beings as less than human and as disposable property? Throughout the South, beginning about 130 years ago, statues were erected in public places to celebrate the Confederacy as if it were a noble cause, as if it had won the Civil War. In recent years, some of those statues have been removed from public squares. One of the largest was a 21-foot-high likeness of Confederate General Robert E. Lee that stood atop a granite pedestal twice that height in a major traffic circle in Richmond, Virginia, which was the capital of the Confederacy. It was removed only in September 2021. Confederate war hero statues are a celebration of white supremacy. Sadly, most of them still remain. Throughout the South, there are over 700 of these monuments. That's just wrong. Our public squares belong to everyone. They should be places where we celebrate democracy and freedom and equality, and not Civil War generals who fought to perpetuate slavery.
The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1917. That was the day Illinois Governor Frank Loudon hoped to meet with striking streetcarmen in an effort to end their strike. Transit workers in Springfield, the state's capital, had been off the job since July 25th. But the strike had gained so much support that Springfield had now erupted into a full-blown general strike. According to the Sangamon County Historical Society, thousands of union members shut down mines, railroads, bakeries, restaurants, laundries, and construction sites following the violent crackdown of a pro-labor march by state police and militia. The march had been scheduled for September 9th. The union hoped to show support for the striking streetcarmen after a number of clashes between strikers and state militia. After they were denied a permit, many of the 50 or so unions decided to march anyway and were attacked. Some were shot. More than 40 suffered bayonet-inflicted injuries. By the 11th, most everyone in Springfield had walked off the job. Striking women shoe factory workers stopped a streetcar, pulling the scab drivers off by force. By the end of the week, as many as 12,000 members of 34 unions in the city were on strike. When telephone operators walked off the job, they paralyzed communications of the scab streetcar drivers and the state National Guardsmen. The streetcar strikers refused to meet with the governor until troops were withdrawn from the city. The governor insisted disloyal, pro-German forces were at fault for the labor troubles. By the 16th, the streetcarmen agreed to negotiate and the general strike was called off. But the company refused to meet striker demands for recognition and higher wages, or even take them back. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River and the Rogue River Valley of southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 50 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting a high of around 90, a tad warmer than what we had yesterday. Plentiful sunshine with winds out of the north-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Clear skies tonight with lows in the low 50s, and winds will be out of the northwest at 5 to 10. Mostly sunny tomorrow. A decrease in the temperature with a high of around 81 to 82. Winds will have shifted back to the north-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Confirmed cases of coronavirus have been updated from the weekend, and we have seen a precipitous spike in both confirmed cases and deceased. Confirmed cases have now jumped to 202,035. That's about 120 some odd extra. And our deceased have increased by 7 and now stands at 237. People continue to refuse to wear masks in spite of the mandates. People refuse to get vaccinated and mock those who do. And these are the numbers that we are now stuck with, and they will only be climbing. Ragweed pollen is rated moderate right outside the window here in Rogue River proper. The air quality index for the region is good at 31 parts per million, and that daytime UV index remains high at a fall angle of 6. Barometric pressure is holding steady at 30.06 inches. Visibility is at 8 miles, and relative humidity is at 82%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 65 and mostly cloudy. Paris is 78 and mostly cloudy. Rome is 83 and sunny. Kyiv is 70 degrees and fair. Kabul is 71 and clear. Hong Kong is 80 degrees and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 68 with heavy rain. Sydney, Australia is 52 and partly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 53 degrees and fair with an air quality advisory for wildfire smoke blowing into the bay. And New York, New York is a pleasant 75 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Kim Tong-Hyung of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. North Korea said yesterday, Monday, that it successfully tested newly developed long-range cruise missiles over the weekend, the first known testing activity in months, underscoring how the country continues to expand its military capabilities amid a stalemate in nuclear negotiations with the United States. The state-run Korean Central News Agency reported that the missiles showed they can hit targets about 930 miles away. State media published photos of a projectile being fired from a launcher truck and what looked like a missile traveling in the air. The North hailed its new missiles as a strategic weapon of great significance, wording that implies they were developed with the intent to arm them with nuclear warheads. North Korea says it needs the weapons in order to deter what it claims is hostility from the U.S. and South Korea, and has long attempted to use the threat of nuclear arsenals to extract much-needed economic aid and otherwise apply pressure. The international community is bent on getting the North to abandon its nuclear arsenal and has long used a combination of the threat of sanctions and the promise of economic help to try to influence the North, but U.S.-led negotiations on the nuclear issues have been stalled since the collapse of a summit between Kim Jong-un and Trump in 2019. At that time, the Americans rejected Kim's demand for major sanctions relief in exchange for dismantling an aging nuclear complex.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Renata Brito of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Climate change could push more than 200 million people to leave their homes in the next 3 decades and create migration hotspots unless urgent action is taken to reduce global emissions and bridge the development gap, a World Bank report has found. The second part of the Groundswell report examined how the impacts of slow onset climate change, such as water scarcity, decreasing crop productivity, and rising sea levels could lead to millions of what it describes as climate migrants by 2050 under 3 different scenarios with varying degrees of climate action and development. Under the most pessimistic scenario, with a high level of emissions and unequal development, the report focuses forecasts up to 216 million people moving within their own countries across the 6 regions analyzed. And those are Latin America, North Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, Eastern Europe and Central Asia, South Asia, and East Asia and the Pacific. Well, we better get to work, or else we're going to have some new neighbors. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up tomorrow for Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day, all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we'll meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goer. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.